This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Eben Jansen. This show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with our entire show available on our YouTube channel. Today we look at cable theft, a scourge that's seemingly not going away here in South Africa. Well, then we'll shift our attention to a victim and the family of the disaster that happened in Nigeria last month. He wants TB Joshua to account. We'll also have a famous Palestinian author to conclude matters today. But first, let's get the day's headlines from Katrine Milan.
Hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Milan, and let's take a look at the headlines this morning. The presidents of Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea, the three countries worst affected by Ebola, have appealed for more aid to help fight the disease. The president of Sierra Leone has told a World Bank meeting in Washington that the world has not been responding fast enough as children are being orphaned and doctors and nurses are dying. More American soldiers have arrived in Liberia's capital, Monrovia, as the U.S. steps up the fight against Ebola in West Africa. Meanwhile, health authorities in many European countries have been preparing for the possible arrival of suspected and confirmed cases of Ebola. British authorities have announced that they will introduce enhanced screening of travellers for Ebola at airports and Eurostar rail terminals. Back home, about 2,000 people have been displaced after a fire at the Kaya Sands informal settlement near Johannesburg destroyed about 500 shacks yesterday. It's not yet known what caused the fire. A local church and NGOs have offered alternative accommodation, food and clothing to those affected. The Swazi national whose truck ploughed through a busy Pinetown intersection over a year ago is expected back in the Durban High Court today. Sonele Goodness May is expected to plead guilty to 24 counts of culpable homicide. On the 5th of September last year, his truck smashed into 4 minibus taxis and 2 cars at an intersection at the bottom of Fields Hill in Pinetown. 22 people were killed at the scene and 2 died later in hospital. Initially, he was charged with 24 counts of murder, but these were changed to culpable homicide charges. And Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta yesterday arrived back in Nairobi, Kenya, to cheering crowds, a day after becoming the first sitting president to appear before the International Criminal Court on crimes against humanity charges. Supporters chanted Kenyatta's name and waved Kenyan flags after he landed in Nairobi airport shortly after dawn. Kenyatta faces 5 counts at the ICC over his alleged role in orchestrating unrest in 2007 and 2008 that left 1,200 people dead and 600,000 displaced.
I left the country sure of my innocence. I am back. What is important for us as a nation is our unity.
Remember, all these top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katrine. Very good morning if you've just joined us again. Cable theft in South Africa is big business and a major headache, costing the economy more than 10 billion rand a year. Recently, major parts of Gauteng were plunged into a water crisis due to cable theft that caused residents to queue for water at various water points. Police, along with entities such as Eskom and Telkom, have called on lawmakers to tighten the Second-Hand Goods Act and equate buyers of stolen goods equally as thieves. Recently, in Northwest, 2 suspected cable thieves paid with their lives when an angry community took the law into their own hands by beating them to death. City Power, the city of Johannesburg's power utility, loses more than 30 million rand a year to cable theft. They embarked on an anti-corruption and anti-cable theft drive, leading to 227 suspects being arrested. Now, Sicelo Goodwill Kulu, Managing Director of City Power and the newly elected President of the Association of Municipal Electricity Utilities, joins us in the studio to talk about the problem of cable theft. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us once again.
Morning, Eben, and viewers at home.
I suppose congratulations is in order first up with your appointment. What sort of mandate did you get from the Association of Municipal Electricity Utilities?
Thanks a lot. I think I must start by just expressing my sincere gratitude for the industry expect to nominate me to this very important position. I'm really humbled by the nomination. I think the industry really is faced with a couple of challenges. I'm sure you're aware of the security of supply issues that we face in the country. So as an association and with the members of all the municipalities across the country, including Namibia as well, we need to make sure that we deal with the issue of security of supply. But there are other issues as well. I mean, the one that you've mentioned now around the cable theft or the metal theft. We need to also then put our heads together in making sure that we deal with this particular issue as well. And there are other issues that, talks to the reliability of supply in terms of the backlog and infrastructure. So those are the issues that we need to talk to as well around the issues of, access to electricity, especially by the previous disadvantaged communities. So these are some of the issues that have been mandated to deal with, and making sure that we mobilize the members of the association and be able to raise the bar on those particular issues.
You mentioned infrastructure, the infrastructure backlog or infrastructure not being maintained as a problem. I want to get back to that a little bit later, but let's deal with the issue of cable theft. First, you back from a 3-day convention just now. What came out of it, and how are you going to turn this situation around cable theft?
Let me say that part of the convention that we had dedicated about 2 hours to a roundtable discussion just around cable theft. And I must say that we were actually blessed with the presence of the Deputy Minister of COCTA, Mr. Nel, who obviously participated in the discussion. But also we then invited other stakeholders, like from NPA, for instance, SABC, for instance, and some of the the private sector, as well as the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And really what we achieved around that debate is to raise the awareness around the cable theft. I think that's the first thing. But secondly, which I think is a major milestone that we've achieved, was also to get to a commitment from the ministry that an interministerial committee will be set up to deal with this specific issue, and coordinating all the effort throughout South Africa to be able to then start getting the law enforcement agencies to be able to start looking at this crime as a very serious crime.
Isn't it time for us to look at the markets instead of the syndicates? Without markets, there can be no syndicates. And we understand that, we've got a Chinese and Indian buyers market in this. Should we not be addressing that when dealing with cable theft?
I mean, certainly, I must say that the recycling industry was also represented as part of the discussion, and issues around the inspection of containers at ports, those were looked at. So I think that basically cuts across the whole value chain in terms of making sure that if we can be able to catch some of these perpetrators either at ports or at the scrapyard metal dealers, or even when we manufacture some of these, cable, and make sure that we've got some sort of identification. So even the private sector, from the manufacturing point of view, they were part of that discussion.
One of the other issues that we deal with here in South Africa is electricity theft and wearing your new hat. That will be, I think, one of the issues that you'd have to address. How are you going to approach this scenario with communities who've been relying on izinyoka for power for so long?
I mean, certainly it is a big issue, and it's something that we need to work with the communities. What I've really picked up based on my experience and obviously some of the discussions that we've had over the week is that as utilities alone, we cannot win this war. So we need to be able to make sure that the communities play their role as well in making sure that they report illegal connections, for instance. But I know that as an industry, and based on the deliberations that we had, there are a couple of technologies that we're deploying, like your protective structures, for instance, split prepaid metering, smart metering, and these are the things that we've been talking about. And hopefully a combination of technology, awareness campaign, education, and also making sure that we deploy certain security and intelligence, we should be able to win this particular war. And I think we are as an industry, but we need to step up our efforts, of course.
You're confident that you'll get buy-in from the type of communities we see on screen now with these kinds of connections? Not only dangerous, it is illegal.
Certainly, it's illegal and very dangerous. And I think we need to also look at other issues around, socio-economic issues, job creation, for instance, because some of the people obviously are not stealing because they actually want to steal, but it's because of other pressures. And as a result, if we structure our tariffs, we then consider those poorest of the poor and make sure that we do not structure the tariffs in such a way that it becomes expensive. So there's a myriad of approaches in dealing with this particular issue, and I'm saying that if you consider the approaches holistically, we should then be able to win the war.
I wish you luck with getting the tariffs down with Eskom. We're going to have double-digit increases, it seems, for the next 5 years. But now I want to talk to you about the infrastructure backlog that you mentioned a little bit earlier. How are you going to deal with it? We see with the water crisis we had in Johannesburg recently that there's a real problem, it seems, with ailing infrastructure that, if one's honest, have not really been properly maintained over the years. How are we going to deal with that?
I think infrastructure backlog still remains a big concern and issue in the country as a whole. And what we're doing as an association, and we've been talking to the PICC, the Presidential Infrastructure Coordination Committee, and engaging with also bodies like SANED and the DOE in making sure that the funding is made available. And we've lobbied very, very seriously in such a way that there's been a budget that has been made available through what we call an ADAM project, through the DOE. And also we've been advising as well SALGA on some of the issues where we actually need support on. So as an association, I think we're actually talking to relevant stakeholders in making sure that we deal with this particular issue. But again, the respective municipalities, especially metros, they've actually put a lot of funding towards this. If you look at Johannesburg, for instance, we're looking at about over 8 billion that needs to be spent by electricity department alone over the next 3 years. So I think there's recognition from the political principals that this is a big issue. It needs to be attended to, and I think they've responded adequately in terms of funding. We just need to roll up our sleeves now and make sure that we actually work hard to reverse the situation and reduce the average age of the infrastructure.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It's very, very important business that you are busy with. A country's economy can only grow if its infrastructure is in place, and it seems as if our infrastructure is ailing at the moment. But thank you for joining us and putting us in the picture. That is, well, the city power, or the director of city power here in Johannesburg, and now the elected president of the municipal electricity utilities, Mr. Sicelo Goodwill Kulu, joining us this morning. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at what you're saying on social media, what you're talking about, what are you passionate about. At SABC Newsroom, of course, we had this horrific fire overnight here in Johannesburg at Kaya Sands. If anyone knows what people will need, blankets, food, building materials, or where to take it, please post. Yes, please do so. Thank you, Abigail. Thank you for that. Of course, 2,000 people are homeless today. Zinat Mayat says, tonight, let's all remember the people of Kaya Sands in our duas. That's prayers. For those of you that don't know, imagine having all your belongings burnt up. Yes, more than 500 tracks have been burnt, leaving 2,000 people homeless there. Cameron McKenzie says, can't help contrasting City of Cape Town shack fire response with City of Joburg. People need food and shelter first, then material to rebuild. Yep, Cameron, at least we are busy, getting busy. Joburg's sister says, if you have anything to spare, Joburgers, many people at Kaya Sands Informal Settlement lost everything in the fire. Please open your hearts. Yes, that is a common question that's asked. Change Agent says, as we observed, okay, thank you. Selling me down the river there once again. Thank you, Ayanda. As we observe World Homeless Day. Thank you very much, Ayanda. Our thoughts and prayers. I just can't get it right this morning, seems. Anyhow, let's move on. Let's take a look at the world's front pages. What's happening in the world this morning? The Independent in the UK. Officials are urgently investigating reports that a British man has died of Ebola in Macedonia and another has contracted the disease. British authorities have announced that they will introduce enhanced screening of travellers for Ebola at airports and Eurostar rail terminals. Le Monde in France says German Chancellor Angela Merkel yesterday expressed a growing willingness to use government spending to stimulate growth. This as evidence grows that the German economy, the largest in Europe, is beginning to stall. Then the International New York Times has a striking picture of a volcano erupting in Indonesia. Hundreds of people have been forced out of their homes over the past 4 days following volcanic eruptions on Mount Sinabung in Indonesia. The volcano, which has been active since September 2013, erupted in February, killing 16 people and forcing thousands to flee their homes. No casualties have been reported this week. There you see that wonderful picture. Now, on a lighter note, we shift our attention to the news making headlines down under, our Australian friends. Although the story about Australians riding kangaroos to school may be false, the legend of the boxing kangaroo is not. 2 kangaroos were caught on camera in an intense boxing match on a suburban Australian street, making headlines on news websites or top news outlets throughout the country. The kangaroos can be seen punching and kicking each other close to houses on the central coast of New South Wales. Boxing kangaroos are generally male and occasionally seen in country areas. Well, all males like a good punch-up every now and again. You're watching Newsroom. We'll be back after a short break.
Who are we, you ask? This is who we are.
We are technologically driven.
We are unashamedly Afrocentric.
We advise you not only on legal matters,
but on health issues as well.
We bring imagination to life.
We celebrate arts and culture and lifestyle.
We tackle life challenges head on.
We dig deep. We probe. We question.
We invite you to take a view from our house, as we tell it without fear, separating fiction from factual.
We are the SABC News Channel.
All news, all global, all the time.
SABC News, we've got Africa covered.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom on SABC News. Televangelist TB Joshua has promised to deliver money, anointed water and maize meal to the families of those killed at his guest house. But is this enough? Now, Tandu Kolo, who lost his sister when the building collapsed, has come up with a website called TB Joshua Must Account for the Deaths, which aims to seek justice for the bereaved families. Now, Tandu Kolo Doho joins us in studio today. Very good morning to you, Tandu. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It's a pity it's under such difficult circumstances. You've lost your sister, and you've had a whole lot of interactions with, I think, a lot of other families, bereaved families. Just tell us the thinking behind the website that we see on screen right now.
Well, the website is developed basically for three reasons. One, it's for me to remember my sister, whom I loved dearly. Secondly, is for any affected family to upload their pictures so that as to create memories for future generations. Thirdly, it is to call for TB Joshua to account for the deaths of... He didn't take any responsibility for what happened, and I think somebody has to take responsibility, and that has to be the overseer of the church. It happened to be Prophet TB Joshua.
What do you make of the claims by TB Joshua and members of his church that it was Satan who made the building collapse? There was a plane that flew over and sprayed a mysterious substance, and suddenly the building collapsed. What do you make of that story? Is it a failure to accept responsibility?
Exactly. It's a failure to accept responsibility. Well, we can say, we shorten the argument. We agree the devil himself was driving the plane. But what did he do after the collapse of the building? Did he send condolences immediately thereafter? What we read in the newspapers is that, in fact, he stopped emergency personnel from coming into the site. And on a Sunday preceding that event, he went on to say the world is concerned about a few people who died. Now, he should be concerned even about one person who dies in his vicinity.
Absolutely. It's always difficult. It's very difficult when it's your own family members, when you hear people make such utterances, because it is such a difficult thing to come to terms with. I want to ask you about your view about TB Joshua and your sister's view about TB Joshua before this incident happened.
Well, my view of Prophet TB Joshua is that he's a leader of a particular church, a charismatic church, which draws many people to him, including my sister. But I've never been one to be a fan of Prophet TB Joshua, for reasons that I'm not up to the tangibles that he offers. I believe I'm equipped enough with everything that can make me achieve whatever I want. It's not about somebody else, and I think it's a process of, it's disempowering people and communities to rely on somebody else. It's worse even if this person is far away from where you stay. We have the ability as human beings to be what we can be within ourselves.
Absolutely, it is the power that God gives us in the end. Exactly. I want to talk about your sister a little bit. You put together this wonderful website in remembrance of your sister. Yeah. What was her journey? What was she going to go do there? What was the thinking behind the visit to the TB Joshua Church then?
Well, my sister was a teacher by profession. She had some personal struggles. She's a divorcee. She had to raise single-handedly a child who's now 20-year-old. And yeah, she was meeting some obstacles in life, and she felt that she could get a breakthrough by going to Prophet TB Joshua. But unfortunately, her life was destroyed by
Unfortunately, it all came tumbling down. Just tell us, we see a lot of reports in the media about support that TB Joshua is giving to families such as your own and other bereaved families. Is that true? Is it true? People say they're sending bundles of money to family, 20,000 Rand at a time. Have you had any of that kind of support?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's quite true. His disciples came to my home in the Eastern Cape. They left 5,000 Rand the first day. The second day they came, they left 2,000 Rand, total of 7,000 Rand and some groceries. But it's not enough. Even if they left 1 million rands, my sister is not worth, is priceless. You can't put a price tag on the life of my sister.
Yeah, you can't replace a loved one with all the money in the world. That is the thing that is so difficult, I think, to come to terms with. What do you think of other believers now here in South Africa? They've come back, who've survived this disaster, but they say that they are happy to go back to TB Joshua's church tomorrow. What would you say to them?
Well, people have, it's their choice. But whilst TB Joshua called the people who died martyrs, which means they were willing victims, I dispute that. I call them heroes and heroines, for the mere fact that through their deaths, we will now begin to scrutinize churches and church leaders. We will begin to understand who are charlatans, who are real, genuine men of God. There's chaff, there's grain. I think TB Joshua, not because of his fame or whatever, because of lack of proper positive response immediately thereafter.
And compassion.
And compassion. In my view, he falls under the chaff.
Yes, I think that is a view that a lot of the families, the bereaved families that you interact with, also share now. Just tell us how many of the bereaved families and friends and so forth of the victims are now interacting with you and have signed up on the website.
There's about 10 families, in fact 11 to be exact now, who have signed up, who agree that we must institute civil claim against Prophet TB Joshua. But I must say that there would be more had it not been these 5,000 Rand. You know the levels of poverty in our country.
Yes.
You know how much people get to be enticed by even a cent.
Yes.
So people have been misinformed to say that you can't institute civil claim whilst investigations are continuing. I'm here to say that you can actually institute civil claim. We're not instituting criminal charges here. We're instituting civil. You can sue a person.
So do you feel that there was a scenario where TB Joshua sent some of his apostles, as they call themselves, to come in and pay off families to make sure that these families don't sue and force them to account in the future?
You know, it's much more than that. It's much more than that. If you interact with some of the people who are real staunch followers of TB Joshua, you would be sure they are brainwashed. How they speak good of TB Joshua, even in the face of having lost a wife or a husband.
We saw the story of a gospel singer who went there and who spoke about this brainwashing that happens. The fact that, you know, when you get there, they give you stacks and stacks of DVDs that you have to watch and you have to read this material. So it is a brainwashing process that happens. Is that the similar experience that's been shared with you?
That's the similar experience. People tell, there's a guy who came all the way from Eastern Cape to be on Emmanuel TV to try and meet up with some people about her own brother. They put him into a dark room. They fed him with these DVDs, watching how the building collapsed, trying to have him make sense of that instead of focusing on the death of her brother.
Finally, you're going to have a civil challenge, it seems. Have you had a look at legal costs, or have you been approached by any legal entity that's willing to help you in this process, understanding that the jurisdiction would be in Nigeria?
I must thank the legal professions in South Africa. 3 companies approached me. They say they are eager to help out. So now it's up to me to choose which one.
Well, that's the good news. The good news for the families of the bereaved families of the deceased. As you said, no money in the world can replace your wonderful sister. Thank you, Thando, for joining us today and sharing this deeply personal story with us. Of course, the website is called TB Joshua Must Account for the Deaths that happened in the disaster on September 12. It is now 4 weeks ago on that Friday afternoon, lunchtime, when a building collapsed, killing 80 South African citizens, 115 in total. Thando, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, sir.
Well, let's take a look at what you are on about on social media now. Brother Seed says, I think an interesting question we should answer is whether Ebola can be transferred via money. If so, then we are all in danger. Brother Seed, that is a deep, deep question. Mtobisi Mtembu, we are all Africans, whether you're from West or East Africa. We should be working together to combat Ebola. African HODs unite, says Mtobisi. Adam Bredenberg says, I think America's Ebola fighting strategy is quarantine Africa. Right, that's right. That's why they've sent the military, Adam. They've sent the military to West Africa. Paul Newman says, to stop Ebola from entering the UK, why not just do blood tests on every passenger coming to the country? Paul, that would be way too extreme and would be bordering on fascism, my friend. Ebola Spain, I am ashamed of the reaction of a few people in my country. They prefer to save a dog to save the nation. They need logic, says Ruben Yepes, who is from Spain. Of course, they put down the dog of the nurse that, was found to have this dreaded disease. Yes, Americans have sent troops to West Africa to make sure that nobody gets out to their country. Sad state of affairs, but let's hope that we get to grips. Far too many South Africans have lost their lives. Nearly 3,500. That's our Facebook page you're seeing there. About 200 people have been displaced after a fire in Kaya Sands informal settlement. That's north of Johannesburg. Destroyed about 500 shacks late yesterday. Then parties to the mining sector. National Consultative Forum chaired by President Jacob Zuma and Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa have unanimously agreed to support the mechanism of South African mining operations. More on that on our very own page. And then the Zulu King, Goodwill Zwelithini, has encouraged African governments to financially support women in agriculture. You can find all of those stories and a whole lot more on Newsroom's Facebook page. Alternatively, you can also turn to our SABC News website for all the latest developments throughout the day. That's sabc.co.za/news. That's where you'll find all the latest updates all of the time. Now, just before we go to a break, Somalia this week introduced their first ATM. That's automatic teller machine. The ATM, which was installed in the capital city, Mogadishu, has been described by the media in that country as a massive step forward. The machine has been installed in the upscale Jazeera Hotel and only dispenses US dollars, as many customers prefer it over the Somali shillings. The ATM also allows people to withdraw money from international bank accounts using cards such as Visa and MasterCards. Very interesting, is it? We'll be back. You're watching Newsroom after a short break.
think that the media has then fully unpacked of what these strikes could possibly do to the economy if it's going to that extent of a recession?
It doesn't mean that when we solve the mining strike that suddenly the GDP is going to go and increase and we're all going to go and have an economic boom.
True,
so
yes.
we've got to go and look at that fact as well.
Obviously, the media, can't touch on absolutely everything.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very complicated situation.
Watch Media Monitor with me, Alicia Jali, Sundays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News channel.
Zoom into Africa. This is Comoros. The president is Mr. Ikilulu Dwanine. Comoros got independent from France on 6 July in 1975. The population is over 700,000 people. One of the major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is the Comoran franc.
Hello and welcome back. You're with Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the news making headlines this morning. The presidents of Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea, the three countries worst affected by Ebola, have appealed for more aid to help fight the disease. The president of Sierra Leone has told a World Bank meeting in Washington that the world has not been responding fast enough as children are being orphaned and doctors and nurses are dying. More American soldiers have arrived in Liberia's capital, Monrovia, as the U.S. steps up the fight against Ebola in West Africa. Back home, about 2,000 people have been displaced after a fire at the Kaya Sands informal settlement near Johannesburg destroyed about 500 shacks yesterday. It's not yet known what caused the fire. A local church and NGOs have offered alternative accommodation, food and clothing to those affected. And in the courts today, the Swazi national whose truck ploughed through a busy Pinetown intersection over a year ago is expected back in the Durban High Court today. Zanele Goodness-May is expected to plead guilty to 24 counts of culpable homicide. On the 5th of September last year, his truck smashed into 4 minibus taxis and 2 cars at an intersection at the bottom of Fields Hill in Pinetown. 22 people were killed at the scene and 2 died later in hospital. Initially, he was charged with 24 counts of murder, but these were changed to culpable homicide charges. More on these stories are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katrine. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has criticized the International Criminal Court for summoning his Kenyan counterpart Uhuru Kenyatta on charges of crimes against humanity. Museveni has urged African countries to reconsider their membership of the tribunal. 52-year-old Kenyatta is the first head of state to come before the ICC. He has appeared at the Hague-based court before, but not after he became president. Earlier, Kenyatta, his wife and the supporters who accompanied him to The Hague were welcomed by Vice President William Ruto at Nairobi Airport. Both Kenyatta and Ruto face charges of organizing mass ethnic violence after a disputed 2007 election in which the two were then on opposite sides of the political divide.
Kenyatta arrived in Nairobi at dawn amid celebrations. The red carpet was out and so were the traditional dancers. He stopped to inspect a guard of honor and then began a procession along Nairobi streets where his supporters chanted that Kenyatta is innocent, some waving Kenyan flags and his portraits. His return, contrary to his departure, was publicized with the Interior Ministry asking Kenyans to come out in large numbers to welcome him. He was accompanied by his deputy, also facing similar charges at the Hague-based court, but in a different case.
I left the country sure of my innocence. I am back. What is important for us as a nation is our unity.
He faces 5 counts of crimes against humanity, 4 allegedly orchestrating the violence that followed the 2007 general elections. His case has ever been postponed after the prosecutor said she did not have sufficient evidence. Several witnesses have either dropped out of the case or recanted their evidence, and the prosecution blames it on intimidation. Ruto's case has already gone to trial. The two men who were on opposing sides during the 2007 elections are now political allies. Kenyatta left Ruto as the acting head of state while he was away in The Hague, opting to go as a private citizen. The decision on what next for Kenyatta's case will be known in 3 weeks' time. Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Kenya.
Well, our East African correspondent Sarah Kimani joins us on the line now from Nairobi in Kenya. Very good morning to you, Sarah. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
Sarah, Uhuru Kenyatta received a hero's welcome, the red carpet at the airport. Is that the mood of the Kenyan people?
Well, this is the mood among his supporters, but of course, a select number of Kenyans have actually asked how do the victims of the post-election violence who are yet to receive any justice 7 years since that violence occurred in Kenya receive this, because there has been very little said about them, even as Kenyatta left for The Hague, even as he came back. Concentration has actually been around Kenyatta. Of course, his supporters are very happy because the news around here among Kenyatta's supporters was that he may be arrested, and so they were very happy to see him back home.
He's also received support from Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni. It's a real sign of solidarity amongst African leaders against the International Criminal Court, it seems. Would that be fair?
Well, it is not surprising that President Museveni has come in support of President Kenyatta. Museveni has been one of the greatest critics of the court, even though his government had referred Joseph Kony to the court. But now he says they have been able to deal with Kony themselves, and so they do not need the court. He also feels that the court is imperialist and only targets African leaders. And so, especially because President Kenyatta was supposed to be among the guests at the Independence Day celebrations yesterday, he feels that for him for Kenyatta to miss such a celebration, for him to miss a day before the groundbreaking for infrastructure projects that have very huge economic impact on the region, for him to attend the court, that shows that the court does not care about the region so much, but cares about its image, to be seen, to have caught a big fish. And so they feel that it is time that African leaders stopped cooperating, African countries stopped cooperating with the court.
Sarah, let's talk about the evidence that the International Criminal Court will be using. Kenyatta's lawyers argued at a pre-trial hearing that the case should be shelved because of a lack of evidence. What is your views on that?
Well, what the court said, and when President Kenyatta had been summoned for the status conference, is for him to be able to listen and for his lawyers to explain exactly why up to now his case has stalled, because the prosecution says that President Kenyatta's government and the president himself are obstructing justice by holding on to some of the evidence that is needed, including telephone records during that time of the violence, his land records, his income tax returns. Because what they say is that one of the things that he allegedly did is finance that violence. And so they want to be able to prove that through his records. But the government, through the Attorney General, has said they have provided what has been asked for, and they are not in a position to provide anything more. The lawyers for Kenyatta are saying they will not be providing anything else because they feel there is no evidence, and that is why the prosecutor seems to be digging deeper every time. And so they're asking for the throwing out of the case, while the prosecution wants an indefinite suspension of that case, still believing that at some point they will be able to get that evidence, probably hoping that once Kenyatta is out of government, then they will be able to get that evidence.
Sarah, finally, I want to ask you about witnesses being reluctant to come forward. Do you have reports in Kenya of witnesses being intimidated?
Well, we do not have definite reports, but what we know is one journalist called Baraza has actually the case has been passed here in Kenya, saying that he should be extradited to The Hague to answer to charges of not of intimidating witnesses and outing witnesses and paying witnesses, so that the case against these two gentlemen, William Ruto and President Kenyatta, does not go on. However, as journalists, we still do not have evidence to that. But we are waiting for him to go to The Hague. He's yet to be sent to The Hague because he has appealed that ruling. But the prosecution says that the reason witnesses are not appearing, and some of them have recanted their evidence, is because either they themselves directly or through their families have been intimidated, and so they fear to stand against the president and his deputy in the highest court in the world.
Sarah Kimani, our East African correspondent, thank you very much for giving us a little bit of an insight after a triumphant return of Uhuru Kenyatta from the ICC yesterday. Now, Dr. Diana Bhuttu is a Palestinian-Canadian lawyer and a former spokesperson for the Palestine Liberation Organization. She's best known for her work as a legal advisor and a participant in peace negotiations between Israeli and Palestinian organizations. Earlier in her career, she worked on Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, serving as the only female negotiator in her 5-year tenure. Well, we are honored to be joined by her in our studio here in Johannesburg today. Very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Very difficult job that you must have had the last decade or so. Tell us a bit more about the life of a negotiator in this seemingly never-ending conflict.
The big problem for Palestinians and for Palestinian negotiators is that we are a very weak party negotiating opposite a very powerful party, and that very powerful party is backed by the United States. And at the same time, this military occupation is continuing as we were negotiating. And so what the Israelis ended up doing all throughout the period of negotiations was more of a dictation rather than a negotiation. They would impose conditions and tell us what the outcome would be rather than sitting down with us as equals. And this is why I'm now speaking about how failed the peace process is and how we now must move away from the peace process into something to hold Israel accountable.
What would that be? We see a global move. We see Israel Apartheid Week, the rise of that globally. We see the disinvestment campaign, sanctions, BDS here in South Africa being quite successful. Is that the route that the organization should be going, seeing that the peace process is not, there's no traction seemingly?
Absolutely. I think that the only way that we can move forward now is to begin to hold Israel accountable. The period of the negotiations only served to provide a facade for Israel to build and expand settlements and to continue to carry out home demolitions. And so now what we've been pushing for is for boycotts, for divestment, for sanctions to be imposed on Israel and to hold Israel accountable before the International Criminal Court and elsewhere. Otherwise, my fear is that Israel is going to carry out yet another military assault, as it did on the Gaza Strip earlier this year, and will continue to build and expand Israeli settlements, as they've just announced.
We've just seen a scenario with the International Criminal Court. You've been sitting next to me where, you know, African leaders are often targeted by the International Criminal Court. Should this body not be doing the same with Israeli leaders when we see disproportionate violence being perpetrated against the young and families in Gaza?
This is precisely the point. If the International Criminal Court is to have any credibility, it has to move beyond simply focusing on Africa. And there are leaders, such as the Israelis, who have committed war crimes, and in particular committed war crimes for a number of years now that have gone unaddressed. For example, the construction of settlements, or the dropping of the 20,000 tons of bombs that they did earlier this summer, which ended up targeting schools, hospitals, mosques, medical facilities, etc. So it's time to hold Israel accountable under the International Criminal Court rather than simply holding African leaders accountable.
What's been the reports or the experience that you've made in Gaza in the last 50-day war? We had reports from doctors that their ambulances were shot down, their hospitals were targeted illegitimately. Are those legitimate concerns, and did those kind of things happen?
Absolutely. The United Nations has documented that more than 100 schools were targeted and more than 60 medical facilities were targeted. Ambulances were also targeted. This is all a violation of international law, and unless and until we hold Israel accountable, we're going to see more of this happening. The problem with Israel is that it's never been shown a red light. It's always been coddled. It's been treated as though it's just a normal nation, and this is why the boycott movement is so vitally important to send Israel the message that it's no longer going to be treated as a normal country. It has to be sanctioned in the same way that South African apartheid was sanctioned.
Do you think the world is kind of waking up to that reality? We see the rise of these movements all around the country. They're starting to almost in every big city around the world, you have a week-long protest and so forth. But does that really work? And link that with social media campaigns. Does it really have an effect on the ground?
Absolutely. One of the main things that's happened over the course of the past 9 years, now our BDS movement, our boycott movement has only taken effect for 9 years, is that Israeli leaders are now beginning to listen, and the Israeli people are beginning to recognize that what's being done in their name is wrong. I think that the more that this spreads and the faster that it spreads, the sooner that we will actually see an end to this crisis, an end to this conflict, liberation for the Palestinian people, and return of Palestinians to their homes.
We see as much a war on social media as has been happening on the ground. What are your views on the social media war? We see a lot of fake photos and a lot of extreme scenarios being played out. What are your views on this?
I think that social media plays a very vital and important role because of the fact that for a long period of time, there was an attempt to try to portray some sort of balance between Palestinians and Israelis, as though you should be having a war criminal on the same stage as somebody who is fighting for their freedom. And so social media is balancing out that imbalance. Now, it's not perfect, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done, not just on this issue, but on a number of issues. But it's at least providing people with alternative sources of information that is often not covered by journalists who are living in Palestine.
Do you see this conflict being exported first through social media and then on the ground through other parts of the world in the months and years to come?
We already see that this issue, it always has been at the very core of the crisis in the Middle East and of the issues that are facing the Middle East. And so this will continue to be the core issue in the Middle East, and this is why we need to address it now.
Finally, we've got about a minute to talk about your visit to South Africa. We've got a little bit. So what are you doing in South Africa now? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing here.
I've been visiting 5 cities in South Africa. It's my second home, I feel it is, every time I come here because the people of South Africa are so welcoming and warming. I've been speaking about the need to increase this boycott movement, to push for sanctions, and it's been a very warm and welcome reception, and I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Dr. Diana Buttu is a Palestinian Canadian lawyer and former spokesman of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, also the only female negotiator in the peace process, who says to us now that, well, maybe we should move past the peace process and find something different. Thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's finally take a look at what you're talking about on social media. It's Friday morning. What are you passionate about right now? At SABC Newsroom is where you can send us your contributions. E-tolls. Is it always e-tolls? George Madiba says, don't scrap the e-tolls, they make the roads attractive. Yes, and expensive, some would say. The only thing you can do is to remove the cord that is linked to our bank accounts. Yes, George, it's a tough one. Dr. Mokwajani says, what difference will it make if e-tolls are scrapped and introduced field levy? Still, we will suffer. We won't suffer so much. Mpo Tlapi says, e-tolls, believe me when I say soon e-tags will be e-cancelled. Incredible what the fear of losing votes will force a provincial government to do. Civil disobedience is my new favorite thing, says Jack Devnarayan, the famous actor here in South Africa. Yes, that is true. Civil disobedience. Civil disobedience, you shouldn't be preaching civil disobedience, Jack Devnarayan. Anyhow, that's Jack's view. Some people say I look like Jack. What do you guys think? Do I look like Jack? At SABC Newsroom is where you should send it through. My mother doesn't think so. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show then repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a total rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. We also stream live on YouTube at that time with the entire show available on demand on our YouTube channel all of the time. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.